This week, Paul and I discuss RSA 2019 and his experiences there. In the news, WordPress accounted for 90% of all hacked CMS sites in 2018. No surprise. Facebook leaves itself wide open to website visitor identification exploits, and a list of brokers that sell your information. Stay tuned for all that and more on this episode of Application Security Weekly.
This is a Security Weekly production. Signal Sciences secures the most important web applications, APIs, and microservices of the world's leading companies, protecting over 7,500 applications and 150 billion production requests per week. Signal Sciences Next-Gen WAF and RASP help companies increase security and maintain site reliability without sacrificing velocity, all at the lowest total cost of ownership. Signal Sciences' patented technology protects any application against any attack, with integrations into any DevOps toolchain. Signal Sciences, demand more from your WAF. Learn more at signalsciences.com/PSW.
Welcome, everyone, to episode 53, our 54th episode of Application Security Weekly. I'm, of course, your host, Keith Hoodlet, and I'm excited to be joined once again by my illustrious co-host, Paul Asadorian.
Hey, what's going on, Keith? How are you?
Good. It's been a couple weeks, but good to be back in the microphone or the speaking chair or whatever they call these things,
right?
In my DX Racer in this case. But a couple of quick announcements before we jump into today's conversation. First, join us April 1st to the 3rd at Disney's Contemporary Resort for InfoSec World 2019, where you can connect and network with like-minded individuals in search of actionable information. Visit infosecworld.misty.com and use the registration code Oscar Sierra 19er-SecWeek for 15% off the main conference or World Pass. If you're interested in booking an interview or briefing with Security Weekly, please go to securityweekly.com/conference request, that's one word, to submit your request today. Also, John Strand will be teaching active defense and cyber deception at Black Hat 2019. Please register on the website, so wiki.securityweekly.com. Just click on Application Security Weekly. I'm sure it's on any of our show notes, and you can go and check out the registration for that. Pretty cool that John's going to be teaching at Black Hat. Maybe I'll get a chance to see him on there. In the meantime,
yeah, his class sells out fast, by the way, in case you're wondering. Audience out there, register now.
I can see why. I mean, it's John, and it's his class, and he teaches some really good stuff. And not to mention, Black Hills Information Security does a lot of really awesome work. So,
absolutely.
Yeah, no wonder. Paul, RSA 2019. First of all, one of the interesting feedback that I had from a colleague of mine, and you had some actually counter-running feedback to this, was that in terms of the vendor space, walking kind of up and down the floor at RSA, he said he saw very few AppSec vendors. And I thought that was kind of interesting because there are a number of AppSec vendors out there, and I was, having him keep a lookout for anybody that might be interesting for me to check out. But it sounds like you had the opposite experience. Tell me more.
Yeah, well, it's interesting. I think at a high level, since we launched the show, AppSec has exploded even more, right? And I think that many of the application security vendors are struggling with, who do I target? Do I target the security crowd that attends RSA? Now, some of the feedback was many CISOs don't attend RSA because they just feel overwhelmed and bombarded with all of the invitations and stuff that happens at RSA. I could totally see that firsthand, for sure. Now, I did meet and talk with several CISOs while we were there, although many of them were CISOs for security companies, right? So you have to kind of define, like, CISO for an enterprise that is defending and CISO for a security company that is making products, two separate things. Of course, the CISOs from security companies, most are there. So there was, I think, a lighter attendance of CISOs in general. However, I did hear feedback that the ones that were there, if you were an executive or in management of an enterprise, they were asking questions about application security more and more. Topics such as having a software inventory in your SDLC. I got feedback from Derek Weeks, who we're inviting on the show from Sonatype. He was like, more and more people ask me. It's like, usually I have to explain what that is and why you need it. He's like, for the first time, I feel like there was a lot of people coming up to me going, I need that. How do I solve this problem? Right. So they were recognizing that it was a problem and seeking out solutions. Hopefully, they found them at RSA. I think there were quite a few application security vendors there. And of course, as we've discussed on the show, Keith, there's several different subcategories in application security, right? And as you mentioned before the show, the larger players were there that have application security as part of their portfolio. Larger companies, right? HP, IBM. I'd put Synopsys certainly in that category as well, right? Veracode is specific, but a large player in application security. There were smaller companies there as well. In fact, I did a briefing with Peter Donahue from Secure Code Warrior. So Peter Donahue and Matthias Madu, I got the whole background. I'm like, dude, you got to tell me, like, I'm sorry. I want to hear it from you. How'd you start the company, right? They were doing their own independent things. I think Peter was doing like a CTF kind of thing around AppSec that I remember him running at BrewCon when I was there. He's from Belgium. I think, is Matthias from Australia? I want to say.
No, Matthias is from Europe, I
Yeah,
think.
different country, or maybe they were both in Belgium. One was living in Australia, and Matthias was doing similar kind of work, and they kind of got together and they're like, "Hey, we should make a company," and they're very, very successful. And I'd say his approach, it was kind of interesting. I'm like, Peter, your approach is kind of like ours, right? Like, there's no like one set product for everyone. It's not a transactional, like I don't go to Secure Code Warrior, right, and just buy one module. That's my module, and I take it back and I go do things with it. It's similar to the Security Weekly model in that we don't really like selling just an advertising slot. We want to work with you, understand your different requirements, and then give you the Lego building blocks to build a program. Peter and Matthias at Secure Code Warrior, it's exactly that, but for application security. So they're going to look at what languages you code in, what kind of applications that you have. They're going to run tests of your developers and see which areas are stronger than others. And then using their Lego blocks, build a program just for you and integrate into a repeatable process. So there's a linting tool. I think that was Matthias's thing, right? And there's the CTF and training thing, and they blended those things together. It was just a really unique perspective. I think they just took on $5 million in funding.
Nice.
So they
Good for them.
bootstrapped it and grew a fantastic company. I like their approach, their outlook. Two of the smartest people in AppSec basically coming together to solve the problem of how do I allow my developers to learn and write more secure code as time goes on, whether they know nothing or whether they think they know everything, right? There's room, and the way they structure it is gamifying that, but customized to you. I loved the approach, always heard great things about the products. So hopefully we'll be engaging with them more on the show and bringing their solutions to light. Because I thought if you're running a development shop, I know, Keith, you are, right? You need this, right? You need your developers to be engaged with awareness and training inside of your SDLC. And I thought they had a great approach to that.
And that's one of those situations where it really is different than the other kind of user-based training that you hear about, right? Developer training for secure coding is so much better than any other training, like anti-phishing training or, good password hygiene. Like, those are trainings that you should give everybody in your company, and it works to some degree or another. But secure development training, just, man, that gets you so much for your money when it comes to solving problems downstream. And just circling back on something that you mentioned earlier, which is, there are a lot of different areas in application security that you can think about, right? So there's the traditional static code analysis, which I think this year is something like 18 years old, based on the technology that Veracode brought out of Symantec, which came out of the at-stake merger with all the with Christian Ryu and the folks at the Loft. So,
right.
And then, of course, I think Fortify by HP was right after that, like 2002. And then you've got Checkmarks, I think was like 2006. So that's one space that it's ripe for disruption. There are a couple of startups out there that are starting to look at this space and do some interesting stuff with machine learning and quantitative analysis that that thankfully it's necessary, because for what Veracode does, for example, binary static analysis, really relevant when you're writing binaries. Well, the world is based on mostly web apps these
Right,
days,
right.
or
Exactly.
mobile apps, which is a form of binary. But
Hmm.
still, it's like, yeah, that space has changed a lot in the last 18 years. So
It's
it's kind of
interesting.
interesting for the feedback that I've seen from people is you walk the floor and it's people that do AppSec and something else, because White Hat just got bought by NTT, for example.
Hmm.
HP was Fortify. Now it's Micro Focus is who Fortify is run by.
Yep.
And then Checkmarks also has, I think, their own training solution as well.
Hmm.
Uh, and so it's just like here you are with a handful of people if you don't really know what you're looking for. But then there's the Docker security space.
Yeah, and that was had much more of a presence, Keith, at RSA in that container security space. I did get a chance to visit the Aqua booth. I believe it was either right across or right in proximity to the active countermeasures booth, where John Strand and Chris Breton and team had a presence and were showing demos of the latest product from the company that I helped found and still am active in advising today. And so I visited Aqua and I was like, hey, you're in my presentation that I'm giving at RSA later this afternoon. And they were like, what? That's really awesome. I'm like, well, your research team has done a great job. And he gave me a little background about some of the researchers. They've been very involved in container security and putting out a lot of research. I said it was helpful in when we had the incident with our container security. At the time, Aqua had like one of the few posts on that style incident. What's interesting is since then, exposed Docker APIs to the internet has exploded and everyone's using them to mine cryptocurrency, and that took off. So I commended them for being, ahead of the curve. Like before it was a thing we were talking about a lot. It was this weird, like newer thing that it just exploded. So they were happy to hear that. And of course, all the vendors in that space were there because I think that's, someone's calling. I think that's closer to, it's kind of a blending of network and application security, right? It's infrastructure. Well, it's DevSecOps, right? So it's a blending of all of those, but closer to the network and system side than the straight developer side. So, StackRox, Twistlock, Aqua, of course, Layered Insight was bought by Qualys. I caught up with one of the lead engineers from Layered Insight who lives in the area, John Kinsella, great guy. Love to pick John's brain. In fact, we've got a call with John to talk about some other things. And so when I gave my talk, is Keith still with us? Sorry.
Yeah, I'm still here.
Okay,
yeah,
good.
Don't worry.
Yeah, they were just switching screens. I mean, no worries. So I couldn't see you. It's okay. So when I gave my talk, it was kind of interesting because when I was prepping for my talk, now my talk is on container security. And it's basically my take on taking a small application, putting it in a container, pushing it up to the cloud, and researching and designing how we're going to push software out. And it was an eye-opening experience, right? And then we had a security incident that we had to do forensics on. So it made for, I thought, a great talk, especially for those that have never done anything with containers. If you're a security person and you've never played around with containers and your dev teams are just starting to use them or maybe have been using them and not telling you, you're not at the table. And I like, how do you get up to speed fast? And I was like, look, I'll share my experience from a security practitioner's perspective on deploying Docker, moving things into containers, and learn from my mistakes is basically the moral of the story. So I get into the talk, and James Wickett sitting in the front row. I'm like, oh,
nice.
All right, now I'm a little nervous. And Shannon, who runs the DevSecOps Twitter account, is also in the front row. I'm like, well, Shannon, it's so nice to meet you. I appreciate all of your efforts. This talk is, and I kind of explained like this really isn't like all this stuff in this talk. She stayed anyway, which was awesome, and one of her coworkers. They were both very, very nice and very forward thinking on the container and container security front. And then also my former coworker Corey Bosden, who actually works for one of our other sponsors now, ExtraHop. He did a lot of integrations when Tenable bought FlawCheck, right? So that was a container security play. And I did an interview with Corey about containers and container security a year or two ago, like when he was still at Tenable, and his knowledge is very, very deep in the subject, right? So now I'm like, guys, now I'm nervous. So,
right, you've got like some of the luminaries in the industry.
Yeah, people that have done this, right? But they all gave me great feedback on the talk, which was so rewarding for me that people have more experience in container security. I mean, I stood up, the first thing I said was, look, I am not an expert in DevOps or, creating software. I'm a security expert, right? But this is my journey as to what I thought of this whole world. And people got it right away. They were like, I set expectations right in the beginning. And then so the feedback afterwards was amazing because the senior folks in this area were like, it's very good. You hit on a lot of the different points that are questions that, they're fielding as experts in DevSecOps. The people who had not been exposed to containers before, the feedback from them was, Paul, that was fantastic. That was just what I needed to understand a small application and how it goes through the process of going in a container and how that goes up in the cloud and what the various options are, the gotchas, the pros and the cons of basically that entire process. And they were like, they had a just much better understanding. Because I think when a lot of people like to talk, especially in that setting, they immediately jump to, we've got 10,000 containers, we're using Kubernetes, we're spreading across different cloud platforms, and all this stuff. And I'm like, that's great. Like, we'll get there. But a smaller example, I thought the feedback I got anyway, was that really helped people wrap their brain around the things they need to think about. And basically the goal was, look, you as a security practitioner, maybe you haven't done anything with containers yet. You might have heard about it. But now you can sit down with your developers, hopefully, understand Paul's journey and relate some of those things and say, like, how are you checking your containers for flaws as they're being, checked in? And what's your development environment look like? And what kind of automated tests are you doing for functionality and security? And then where are you hosting it? And how do we apply container security, the different perspectives to where we're hosting it, right? If you're serverless, you need some kind of hook, I called it, right? And Shannon was really like nodding her head. She's like, I'm so glad you went over that. The different approaches, because kernel level and privileged containers don't really work once you get to serverless. So a lot of great conversations resulting, from my presentation. A lot of great directions to go in with our own product that we put inside of, containers. And it was just great. I felt good about it because I accomplished my goal of, there were security people there that learn from my journey and will take that back with them when they go back to work. So that was the goal.
And also one other comment about Shannon. So Shannon Leitz also runs DevSecOps.org. I think she's also the original author of the DevSecOps Manifesto that I highlighted in my keynote in Australia last October. So major shout out to her and all of her work, because it's funny, the genesis of all this was like 2009 was DevOps, and then it was who was one of the founders of Contrast Security?
Jeff Williams. Jeff Williams.
Jeff Williams, thank you. And also, Josh Corman. So Jeff Williams and Josh Corman gave a talk on rugged software in like 2011, I want to say.
Yep.
And then, Shannon put together DevSecOps.org, I think in like 2012.
Yep.
And so it's amazing to think, it's still that young, right? Like even to think, okay, back then Docker wasn't really a big thing, and serverless certainly didn't really exist back then. And here we are now, 2019, and it's like, oh wow, like this stuff has, it's come up on us fast.
Yeah, and I don't know if you caught it on Twitter. I think it was Signal Sciences put up a screenshot from my presentation, and it was one of the slides that was like, why not Docker? And it was talking about the lack of documentation. Now, I said in my talk, it's got a lot better, right? Like the progression. Early days of Docker, the documentation was just not there, right? I think today it has gotten a little better. And taking an app, I think it speaks to the process. Through this whole process takes a long time. So by the time I got to even writing the talk, like a year had gone by, right? So, and I did say in my talk, I'm like, it is better now. Like this is a couple of years ago. And someone who we're going to bring on the show, because they were like, oh, what is this, 2014? I'm like, your assessment of that is absolutely spot on. I'm like, context, right? You needed to see all the slides and hear my talk to, you can't just pull that one out of context. And then so we had, some more exchanges, and I'm like, you should come on the show and we should talk about it. And he was like, absolutely. So we're working on getting whoever that gentleman was on Twitter. I forget his name, to be honest with you, but he has agreed to come on the show. And I think he was really big. And when I looked at his Twitter feed, I was like, I can absolutely see where you would get that from, just looking at that one slide. Right. Totally get it. Well, bring you on the show, being an expert in that area. Totally want to, hear all of his thoughts and opinions on that. And like I said, it has gotten a lot better. So it was tons of positive things that came from the talk. In general, there were some good AppSec things going on. Matt did a lot of the briefings with the AppSec companies. And Alan Schimmel, someone else from Sonatype, whose name I can't remember, and John Willis was there. They were running the DevSecOps like one day kind of side conference, and they had 1,000 people there. And they were excited because I think for the first time they had kind of seen it grow and are driving more interest. More people who are going to RSA are interested in AppSec. And agreed, there could have been more AppSec vendors there, right? But the progress that we had made, right? So don't look at it as, well, there wasn't a lot of AppSec vendors there. There was more interest and more AppSec vendors than before, and an event specific to that that had grown significantly since the previous year. So that was all very encouraging from my perspective.
And it's interesting to me because I mean to be, at some point I'm going to write a blog post about this. I am one of those people that bought a .dev domain, and I intend to stand up a blog for my thoughts and rants on these things. But one of my blog posts is going to be on this idea that I'm starting to coalesce around, which is, I call it the hospital model of security, which is you walk into a hospital and pretty much anyone from the nursing staff on up through any of the doctors have a basic understanding of medicine. And of course, there's specializations thereafter, but everyone has that base level medical knowledge of some variety. And I get the feeling that as we progress in the journey through DevOps into DevSecOps, that you're going to find more people, especially in the security space, are going to need to know how to code. Right? They don't have to be a neurosurgeon, but they at least have to be at the capabilities of a nurse, right? Which is maybe basic scripting. And I think that that's going to really shift for a lot of people who, even in, I think, security operations today, could benefit from, understanding basic scripting functionality so that they can turn a lot of their tool sets into automatable alerts, for example, or even one of the things that I've seen is people taking some of their data sets, and when an alert triggers, using that automation to then go and pull other bits of data related to that alert automatically for them. So I get this strong inclination that as people start to think about AppSec and think about DevSecOps, they're going to say, "Oh man, I gotta start learning to code soon," because before we know it, like if you don't know how to code, you're actually going to be a liability for your security team.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. Totally agree. Yeah, so RSA was a great conference. Again, there was probably more AppSec people that we talked to, but it was more Matt than me. It's just the way it happened. And when we had a list, we probably did, between briefings and interviews, roughly 20 to 30 in formal briefings or interviews. And then we had 30 people to visit on the show floor, which doesn't include existing sponsors, who I visit almost every single one of either Matt or myself visited every single existing sponsor. So we had a lot of people to visit. And I do have to say, my experience was so much better having it done that way, right? We carved out who we wanted to talk to. With a show that large, we couldn't go into strategy of, we'll just wander to the show floor and find the cool tech. I mean, there was some of that, but so it was way better having a strategy and specific people to visit. Unfortunately, I didn't have, I took the list and I was like, who's near me and who's available, whose booth isn't busy kind of approach, right? So I walked the show floor a few times on Wednesday before I had to go give my talk. And that was my badge somehow, and I just kind of tested it, got me in before the expo floor officially opened. So I was able to get a couple of chats and demos before the crowds came in. And Chronicle had the coolest product. Their backstory product is just awesome. It's not...
So I've heard.
Yeah.
A lot of people were talking about it.
Dude, hands down, the coolest tech that we saw emerge at the show, for sure. It was awesome.
One of the things I had heard about it, and this is my development self-nerding out a little bit here, but it was told based on the demo that a colleague of mine received on that, that effectively their lookup table is an order one complexity, meaning no matter how big your data set is, it's instant or near instant.
It was amazing. Amazing technology. It looked amazingly easy to deploy. Just dump all your logs to it in a very easy manner. It was just like, I was like, wow, I want that. Can I buy that now? Like, I had my checkbook out. Like, I want that now. And the very few, demos that you get on a show floor, you're like, okay, where do I sign? Basically, it's usually
Right,
maybe one
right.
or two, right? And that was the one. So
Nice. Yeah, a lot of people said that, and I'm glad to hear that feedback from you as well, Paul.
mhm.
So I got to ask though, who had the best swag, or what was like the most interesting
Mm.
vendors that you
I'm
saw
glad
that
you
were
asked
out
that. So many of the vendors, of at least the ones that I met with, had really cut back on the swag. It was kind of interesting.
That's interesting.
There was still, the swords and the whole thing going on,
Yeah.
whatever. But several vendors I spoke with were like, we cut back the budget and we didn't print up a bunch of stuff. They're like, we have some pens, right? And I'm like, I just need a business card just to remind myself that I made a visit and follow up on anything that we
Yep.
agreed upon, right? So, and sometimes I didn't have actually a lot of room to take a lot of trinkets either. Just the way the shipping worked out. We had like this small box we were shipping back. So it was like whatever would fit in there. So I took a lot of, stickers, business cards, pens. But there wasn't a lot of swag going around, to be honest with you.
It's probably for the best. I mean, how much of
Yeah.
that swag? I remember the last couple of years that I went, it was like a lot of that swag just ended up like in trash cans, and I
hmm
was like, what? So
Yeah, and even I mean, we gave out lens cloths, which are nice because we ordered like 4,000 of them. They're small, they're light, so when we ship them, it's easier and cheaper. And when we give them out to people, we're not taking up room in there. I mean, the amount of room a lens cloth takes up is minimal, right? So even some people are
right,
like, oh, I don't want any swag. I'm like, it literally can fold up into like a 1-inch little ball, and they're like, oh yeah, I guess I will take that, right? And,
right.
and to me, that's all you really need. Of course, there was all kinds of contests and all that other stuff and booth presentations. Largely, I avoided most of that stuff. The booths were spectacular, but the swag, I could tell people had cut back. And I was glad for that, actually, because it gets overwhelming. Everyone trying to give you all
Yeah,
this, all this
I think
stuff.
that the first year I went, I had something like, I don't know, 24 shirts or something like that I brought back with me. It
hmm
was insane. I still have a bunch of those shirts that I plan to make a quilt out of at this point.
Right.
They're
Yeah,
actually
that's
sitting in
essentially what you
the
end up
bag in
doing.
the
Right.
closet.
Yeah.
So,
So it was
um,
good. Again, positive interactions with everyone that I spoke with. I mean, literally almost 100% across the board. It was very positive conversations. Everyone was really nice to me because we targeted people, right? So we knew who we were going to go visit, and they were all very welcoming, which is good. Especially
sweet.
Aqua, because I was like, "You guys are in my talk," and they're like, "Wow, that's really awesome." So
Nice,
that was
nice.
good.
Awesome. Well, with that, we are going to take a short break and then come back with the news. Stay tuned.